Thank you guys for sticking around. I know it's been a really long day. It's good to see the diehards are still sticking around to the very end. So like I said, like Dr. Greenwood said, my background is mainly in nutrition. And I don't know how much interaction you guys have ever had with dietitians, but I know the majority of dietitians I know are sort of on the mindset that they're the only ones that should provide nutrition information. I, however, am not of that same mindset. I think you guys, sort of as strength and conditioning coach, athletic trainers, PTs, spend a lot more face time with athletes, and I think you guys should promote sort of good nutrition practices because simply because you guys spend more time with them. So I was hoping I can tell you about sort of different things that I see, hear on podcasts, listen, read online, that a lot of people may have questions about, just general nutrition. So I was hoping we can go over differences of organic versus conventional or non-organic foods. We can go over non-nutritive sweeteners. I hear sort of a lot of misconceptions on that topic. And then grass-fed versus grain-fed. And I had initially supplements on there, but I didn't have enough time in the time slot that I had. We'll still throw a little bit of supplementation in there. So organic versus conventional food. So maybe you guys, for one reason or another, like to promote one over the other. But strictly for this talk, I'm talking about just nutrient content and how it affects health. So you may have other reasons for choosing organic foods. So maybe you want to impact your local economy a certain way, maybe for ethical reasons, whatever the case may be. That's sort of a different argument. I'm strictly speaking on health and nutrients perspective. So how many have heard sort of this argument that organic foods are safer and thus healthier for us? Great. So not the only one that has heard it. So what organic farming does is that it basically largely avoids or excludes certain chemicals, synthetic chemicals, pesticides, growth regulators, and livestock feed additives. That's what organic, when a food sort of has the organic label, this is basically what it means. So this doesn't have a claim over health or what it does to your health. This is just the way it's farmed. But lots of studies still show that it can be contaminated with pesticides or the things that you're not supposed to grow these organic products with. And the way we get this contamination, it can be contamination from the soil. You could also have neighboring farms, so one grows their products organically, the other one doesn't, and you can have sort of wind that takes chemicals from one farm to the other. It can contaminate those organic products. You can also have contaminated water, or they can get contaminated in transport and the way they process and store these organic chemicals. So they're not completely free of the things they're trying to maybe avoid by buying organic food. So manure. So if you can't use sort of certain chemicals, maybe rely on manure to fertilize your crops. Again, you can have microbial contamination. And it's not only for organic food. So both organic and non-organic foods sort of rely on this as a fertilizer. And so there was a statement put out by the Food Standard Agency out of the UK, and they basically said that there's no reason or no evidence to show that one form, organic or non-organic, is more microbially safe than the other. So they looked at all the research, and this was their statement. So if your argument is that organic food is more microbially safe, then sort of just shows that that's not really the case. At least that's not what the research says. So I decided to look into this review article, which is a great way. So instead of looking at 50 to 100 different independent research articles, just find a research paper and then look at what they found. So they sort of summarize the data. And so what they wanted to do is assess the differences in nutrients. So another argument I hear is that organic food is better because it's more nutrient dense. It has more vitamin C, it has more other antioxidants, and that's why you should choose organic versus non-organic. And so they looked at the literature, a period of 50 years, so from 1958 to 2008. So a long time. They looked at all the literature that met their criteria. And what they basically found is that there was no major differences with certain compounds. So vitamin C, phenolic compounds, magnesium, potassium, zinc, copper, not much difference. Some studies showed maybe tomatoes are higher in, lycopene. Others showed that there was no difference, but on average, not a big difference. Conventional foods, higher in nitrogen content, but on average, organic foods are higher in phosphorus content. Who cares? Most of us are not deficient or insufficient in phosphorus, so who cares if organic foods are higher in phosphorus? That's my argument. So what they concluded is that, yeah, there are small differences, but these differences are irrelevant, right? They're not going to have a major impact on your health. And so I just want to make that clear before people go out and buy the more expensive organic foods, thinking that they're healthier. Not necessarily the case. So what I hope you guys do is just take these tidbits of information, pass it along to people you work with, athletes, different people that you come in contact with, that there is no real difference. I hear arguments all the time. I know I should eat organic foods, but since I can't afford it, I just don't choose any fruits and vegetables. That's just sort of a wrong way to approach vegetable and fruit consumption. Another claim that seems kind of dangerous to me is that I've heard organic foods can cure or even treat cancer. So for us in this field, probably aren't going to get fooled by this statement, but you have a lot of people that maybe don't have the educational background to know any different. And it might be expensive to get medical help. So they say, I read this on some website somewhere, so maybe I should consume organic foods instead of seeking medical treatment, which is a little bit scary. But some people have reported that that's what they tend to do. They tend to think they can cure cancer by eating organic food, which is just a little bit crazy to me. And so I think where it all stems from is I found a study that reported on an article that came out in 1974 in a prevention magazine, and that said that one physician out of California was able to cure 4 patients by giving them a 100% organic diet. And again, it wasn't in a peer-reviewed journal, which is a little bit different. One of the great things about being peer-reviewed is if I wanted to get something published, I have to submit it, and a group of my peers, other experts in the field, would have to analyze what I did and see, does my research make sense? So let's say if I wanted to do a research study, are pull-ups or chin-ups better? But I did squats to analyze that. That wouldn't be a very good study design, right? So I'm doing squats to analyze pull-ups and chin-ups. It just doesn't make sense. So when you go and publish things, and this is what Prevention Magazine looks like now, it's not being peer-reviewed, not up to the same rigors or standards that peer-reviewed publications are up to. So we found this study, or this paper that sort of criticized the cancer treatments of America, because they said they offer their patients and families organic foods that can help promote cancer nutrition, despite there being no compelling evidence to support that organic foods can prevent cancer or even treat cancer. And I thought, well, maybe that was in 2008. It doesn't really happen now. So I went and looked on this website. So if you zoom in there, this Cancer Treatment Center of America website said that they provide their patients with organic produce. So that's a little bit scary because that has an implication that maybe organic foods can help prevent or treat cancer, which is just, it's crazy. The research doesn't show it. But somebody who may not know any better may think that, if I get cancer tomorrow, the next day I'm going to just go out and buy organic foods and all my problems are solved. But definitely not the case. So we have different organizations. I know it's hard to read here, but down here we have, the Nutrition Research Council Committee on Diet and Health. We also have the American Institute of Health and Cancer Research, World Cancer Research Fund, and the American Institute of Cancer put out positions saying that there is no evidence that currently exists that pesticides have a major impact on total cancer incidence or mortality. So again, the research isn't there, but you still get websites that sort of produce this kind of stuff. So when it comes down to it, we know that populations that consume more fruits and vegetables tend to have a reduced risk for cancer. That's sort of the bottom line. So currently, no evidence to support or refute the claim that organic food is safer and thus healthier. Again, pass this information along. We know that the benefits of fruits and vegetable consumption highly outweigh the risk of, maybe microbial contaminations or anything else that might be the argument for organic food. So what about non-nutritive sweeteners? Has anybody heard sort of bad things about non-nutritive sweeteners? I gave a talk last month, and a lady came up to me and said, what do you think about non-nutritive sweeteners? I had kidney and bladder problems. My doctor told me to stop it, and now I'm cured of those bladder and kidney problems. He said, just Google it, and you'll find the answer. That's not sort of how we do research, right? We go and look at research. And so some of the claims that I found online is that artificial sweeteners are dangerous to your health. And anytime you use artificial sweeteners, there are pure chemicals, and there's an extra burden on your body to detoxify it. So I love the word detoxifying. It's sort of one of those key words that says it's BS. It's just, detoxifying what is, I hear these sort of words that get used a lot with not a lot of meaning behind them. So again, non-nutritive sweeteners, they have different names: low-calorie sweeteners, intense sweeteners, artificial sweeteners, all the same. So widely used, different foods, beverages, desserts, gums. So we use them. So anything that probably has a sugar-free label has some form of non-nutritive sweetener in it. And there's different kinds. And so came across this study. So the American Health Association got together with the American Diabetes Association, and they put a position paper out. So they wanted to set guidelines for non-nutritive sweeteners. Can we give the American people, or just people in general, a guideline for non-nutritive sweeteners? It's the same how we would give guidelines for maybe protein consumption, carbohydrate consumption, depending on what type of sport you're consuming. They wanted to do this for non-nutritive sweeteners. So they wanted to see if there was adequate data for guidance for non-nutritive sweeteners. How can we use it? How can it be beneficial for our health? And so they looked at human studies where they replaced or they compared non-nutritive sweeteners to caloric sweeteners. So an easy way is that they compared maybe Coke to Diet Coke. So they looked at different studies that did this. And so some of the common ones that they focused on were certain non-nutritive sweeteners we see all the time. So things like Equal, Splenda, Stevia, and Sweet and Low. And so they found that about 64% of the people that they surveyed have there's a negative connotation about artificial sweeteners. That's a lot of people, getting a lot of wrong information. So this is a recent study, 2012. It wasn't from 20, 30 years ago. And so I think marketers know this information. They know that people may have a bad idea about artificial sweeteners, so that they promote their product as being real or natural, as if that has some correlation with it being safe or healthy. But it really doesn't. And so they looked at a bunch of different things. They looked at energy intake. They looked at sort of BMI, body composition. They looked at weight loss, and they looked at certain cardiovascular health in this study. So I decided to just pick one that I thought was really interesting. We'd probably give an hour talk on just their findings. And so they said that there's less compensation in beverages sweetened with a non-nutritive sweetener than with food. So what that means is that, let's say, for example, we use 100 calories, because 100 is a good number, just easy to divide. If I were to consume 100 calories of a Diet Coke, which is sweetened with a non-nutritive sweetener, later out throughout the day, I would compensate by consuming 15 more calories. So 15% of the calories that I just consumed. But if I eat a sugar-free cookie that is sweetened with a non-nutritive sweetener, same 100 calories in a cookie, I may overeat 32 calories back. So I'm still getting a deficit, but I'm getting a lot more deficit with the beverage as opposed to the food. Does that make sense? So that they found, on average, there's a more effective net reduction in calories when you consume your calories with a beverage sweetened with an artificial sweetener as opposed to a food. But after looking at all the data, they said that there's insufficient data to determine conclusively whether the use of non-nutritive sweeteners to displace caloric sweeteners has any real impact on added sugar, carbohydrate intake, also benefits of appetite, energy balance, weight loss, or even cardiometabolic health. So no difference. So we still don't know how that compensation happens, but when we look at all the data and take it into consideration, there's no real difference in benefit. It's not harmful. They didn't find any cancer associated with consuming artificial sweeteners, which are sort of some of the things that I've heard along the way. But I wanted to share this really interesting study that just came out last year. So in September 2014, these group of scientists had their research published in Nature. So that's a really high research article. A lot of people, would hope to get their research published in this article or this magazine one day. But they look at artificial sweeteners artificial sweeteners induces glucose intolerance by altering the function of gut bacteria. So I wanted to walk you guys through that and how they came up to their conclusions. It's a really interesting study here. So the rationale and purpose for this study is that gut bacteria function can change based on your diet or your health status. And so they aim to determine the effects of these non-nutritive sweeteners on glucose homeostasis. So how do we regulate sugar? So if you guys are familiar with diabetics, they don't really handle sugar all that well. That's why their blood sugar is really high, whereas a normal healthy individual has normal blood sugar values after you drink a Coke or have a carbohydrate-rich meal. And so this is what it did. So it took these mice and they put them in different groups. So one group got saccharin, we know it as sweet and low. Another group, typo there, sucralose, which is Splenda. Another group got aspartame, which is known as NutraSweet or equal. And then they had the control group. So one of them got water only, one of them got table sugar, the other one got another type of sugar called glucose. And so after 11 weeks, so they gave them 11 weeks of these different type of sugars and different type of non-nutritive sweeteners. And so the control group who got the water, table sugar, and glucose, they all had normal responses. They looked about the same. But they showed something a little bit different with the non-nutritive sweeteners. So I thought this was an interesting and novel finding. So the mice that got non-nutritive sweeteners had glucose intolerance. And we'll go over what that means in a little bit. But they found that saccharin, or sweet and low, had the most profound effect. So they did a follow-up study. So their follow-up study was to take the same kind of mice, gave them both the same kind of diet. One got saccharin, or sweet and low. The other one got glucose. So they found that this group that got the saccharin developed glucose intolerance. Right? Pretty amazing. And so here's what glucose intolerance might look like. So if we just focus on the chart on the left, normal healthy individual, your normal fasting blood glucose. So if you go, let's say, 10 to 12 hours without eating, and you were to come into the lab, we'd do a finger stick, get a sample of your blood, and measure it. Your blood sugar for a healthy person would be somewhere in that range, 70 to 100. If you're pre-diabetic, you do the same thing, go 10 to 12 hours without eating, do another finger stick, and get a blood sample. You get a little bit higher, so 101 to 125, and you're diabetic, same thing, it would be higher than that, so over 125. So any range sort of above normal, as we say, you're sort of some on the spectrum of being glucose intolerant, somewhere along the way. And so if we look at, sort of focus on this red line first. So this is what a normal person would respond to if you ever go to the lab or a hospital or clinic and do what's called an oral glucose tolerance test. So you show up to the lab in the morning after not eating for 10 to 12 hours. They do a blood stick or a finger stick, take a blood sample, measure your blood sugar, write that number down. They give you a beverage, usually has about 75 grams of carbohydrates. You take it, and then after you consume that beverage, they measure your blood at different time points, maybe half hour after you drink it, hour, 2, 3, 4, 5. And if you were to plot that along this line, this is what a normal person would look like. So your blood sugar would go up, but then your muscles and your liver would take care of it, and then it would come back down to baseline or normal values at about 2 hours later. That's what we expect in a healthy person. If you're glucose intolerant, like diabetic people are, you'll start off at a lot higher value. So let's say here is about 135, right? So we've met the criteria of being diabetic. We're above 125 milligrams per deciliter. You consume the same amount of carbohydrates. It would go up, but it would take a long time to come back down to normal. You're glucose intolerant at that point. So your muscles and your liver don't sort of extract the sugar out of the blood the same way a healthy person does. Does everybody get what glucose intolerance is? It's just not normal, basically, in this aspect. And so like we said, the mice that were getting the saccharin they were glucose intolerant. And so they did this really cool thing. So they transplanted the gut bacteria from one mice, the mice that were receiving the saccharin or the glucose for 11 weeks, transplanted it into healthy specimens, people that weren't, or mice that weren't exposed to the same condition. tested their blood 6 days later, and they found out that these mice were now had impaired glucose tolerance, which is a really cool finding, suggesting that we can change the gut bacteria by giving somebody, or giving a mouse, I keep saying a person, but it's a mouse in this case, giving a mouse saccharin for 11 weeks, and so this is years on the human scale. So it might be somewhere from like 10, getting this saccharin for 10 to 15 years, so that's about the equivalent. And transplanting it into a healthy, sterile mouse, and then they become glucose intolerant. It's almost like a cause and effect here at this point. It's really interesting, and this is what it looked like. So the black line is the healthy, the ones that got the transplant from the glucose mouse. It had a normal response. So it went up, and then it went down, after about an hour, it came back down. But the ones that got the transplant or the gut bacteria from the saccharin mice, it went up a lot higher, so significantly higher, and then took a lot longer to come back down to normal value. This is a really interesting finding, but what does this mean? So it's preliminary data, just came out last year in September, like I said. We need additional research, so we need independent labs to maybe replicate this. Maybe it's some other reason that we don't know about that caused this response, and it wasn't maybe necessarily the artificial sweetener, but they make a really strong case in this research project. And then again, we need to replicate this in humans. So for now, I wouldn't be concerned about it. I still consume non-nutritive sweeteners, not a big deal, but I wanted to share this with you guys today. Grass-fed versus grain-fed. You guys heard anything about this, maybe one way or another? One of the things, as I'm driving into work, I listen to the Joe Rogan podcast. So interesting podcast. I follow MMA a lot. So I do judo and jiu-jitsu, and so that's just one of the sports that I like to follow. And every now and then, he has strength and conditioning coaches on there. He has a nutritionist. And so I do like to hear what other people have to say as sort of the rationale for promoting a certain type of exercise program or a certain type of meal plan. And so one of the things that I heard on there from a very sort of prominent nutritionist that works with a lot of professional fighters is a great idea. The guy says, the way he promotes nutrition for his fighters is that he not only wants them to perform really well during fight night, he wants them to have good health longevity long after their fight career is over. So he's planning, good nutrition practices that's going to help them 5, 10 or 15 years after they finish fighting, which is a great idea. But then he also says that he promotes organic foods and grass-fed beef, or grass-fed anything. So milk from grass-fed cows, butter from grass-fed cows, everything grass-fed, because for some reason he's under the impression that means that you're getting healthier results from eating those types of products. Well, let's see what the research has to say. So maybe you guys have heard something similar to this. Grass-fed is a healthier alternative to grain-fed. I know I've heard it. Has anybody else heard anything similar? And so also, came across a WebMD article written by a physician that grass-fed beef may have some heart health benefits that other types of beef don't have. So let's go through it and see what some of the research has shown. So pulled this out from a research that was done here at Texas A&M. So they compared grass-fed versus grain-fed, and they found that grass-fed had 3 times more omega-3 fatty acids. So yeah, we found omega-3 fatty acids in grass-fed beef. This is something that Dr. Oliver was talking about earlier. Usually we find omega-3 fatty acids in fish. But it also had greater saturated fat. And we'll go through what that means a little bit later. The grain-fed had more oleic acid. So let's just focus on the first one here. And like I said, 3 times more omega-3 fatty acids. But if you remember what Dr. Oliver said, there's different types of omega-3 fatty acids. You have DHA, you have EPA, but we also have alpha-linoleic acid. We'll just call it ALA. And so the reason ALA may be relevant, or may be a good argument for somebody arguing the case of grass-fed beef, is that it may reduce risk factors for cardiovascular disease. Generally, nobody wants to aim to get cardiovascular disease. We want to reduce the risk. So far so good. It sounds pretty good. But the thing we have to know, if you remember from Dr. Oliver's talk, we do a really bad job, our bodies do a really bad job of converting ALA to EPA and DHA, the sources of omega-3 that are actually beneficial to our health. So things when you see, take omega-3 because it's beneficial for the heart, beneficial for our brain, they're referring to the molecule DHA and EPA. So we'll talk a little bit about that later. But it has more saturated fat. We hear a lot from things like the American Heart Association that we need to reduce our saturated fat. And the reason for this is that saturated fat has been shown to increase LDL cholesterol. If you guys remember, LDL cholesterol is considered the bad cholesterol, right? We usually want to lower our values. You see really unhealthy people. You think of maybe somebody, older individual, really heavy set, doesn't do a lot of exercise. You might expect them to have really high values of LDL cholesterol, and that's just sort of one health marker showing that they're unhealthy. And then some research has shown that when we replace polyunsaturated fats with saturated fats, it can reduce our risk of certain cardiovascular events, things like heart attacks and strokes, which is another thing most people want. They want to avoid heart attacks and strokes. And so let's go to grain-fed just for a second. Has more oleic acid. So if you're wondering why oleic acid may be important, is that some have shown that high oleic acid in the diet may reduce LDL cholesterol. So again, the bad cholesterol. We want to get it down. So this is a good thing. And other studies have shown that there's no effect or it even increases HDL cholesterol. The good one, right? The one that's usually referred to as a good cholesterol. So again, this is the benefit of maybe having more oleic acid in your diet. Well, let's look at a study. So in this study, they took 10 individuals that had slightly elevated cholesterol, so blood cholesterol in the blood, and they consumed beef for 5 weeks. So if we were doing a study, so this group maybe got grass-fed beef for 5 weeks first. This other group over here got grain-fed beef for 5 weeks first. You then take a break, go back to your normal diet for 3 or 4 weeks, and then you would switch. So that's what they did in this study, crossover design. And so what they found is that the grass-fed beef actually decreased HDL, the good cholesterol. So that alone would shut down the argument, at least from my perspective, that grass-fed beef is better. How can it be better if it's lowering down the good cholesterol, the cholesterol that we normally want to get higher? So here's a little chart, so you can see this, less than 40 milligrams per deciliter is a major risk factor for heart disease. And the higher we get, the more protective it is against heart disease. So that's one argument against grass-fed beef and how it is a healthier option. Right? We don't want to lower down our HDL cholesterol. So in a different study, they did basically the same thing, except these people didn't have elevated levels of cholesterol. They had normal levels of cholesterol. So they did the same thing. One group got grass-fed beef, the other group got grain-fed beef, and then they swapped after a certain time. And so they found that only grass-fed beef increased HDL cholesterol in these groups. So again, that's sort of another point that's showing that grass-fed beef may not be as good as it sounds. Again, I understand there may be other reasons, maybe there's ethical reasons that you want to support grass-fed beef, but as far as from a health perspective, it's not making a very good case for itself. So again, it only increased it slightly, but again, when we see the reports that show that olive oil is beneficial for our health and that it increases the good cholesterol, it increases it by about this much. I know it may not seem like much going from 45 to about 48. Same thing. So now if we go back to these general terms, and so whenever you see maybe blogs or websites that are showing these things, just be cautious of these general descriptive 3 times more, greater, or more oleic acid. What does that really mean? It doesn't really put a value behind it. Well, let's look at what those values actually are. So if something has 3 times more than something else, it sounds really good at first until we actually look at the numbers. So this is from that study. So the top row here is grass-fed beef. The bottom row is grain-fed beef. So it does in fact have 3 times more omega-3s, but it's 0.02 compared to 0.05 grams. It is such an insignificant amount that it doesn't even matter. But again, I see this argument all the time that grass-fed beef is better because it has 3 times more omega-3 fatty acids. But again, it's the wrong type of omega-3 fatty acids. It's ALA, it's not DHA and EPA, the kind that Dr. Oliver was talking about earlier. So keep that in mind. More oleic acid, who cares? It's not that much of a difference, right? And again, you can argue that maybe grass-fed beef has a little bit more saturated fat and trans fat, but the difference is not really significant. They're very close to each other. But if we look at sort of the recommendations of what some other researchers have found, is that in order to promote health from EPA and DHA, we should be consuming somewhere between 500 to 3,000 milligrams. So I know that's a big range. But for an example, I'm just going to pick on 3,000 milligrams. Let's just use that upper range as it being shown to be safe, and that's what we generally want to consume for better health. And so in the study, they reported that DHA and EPA should be considered not only for general health, but also for those who are high-risk exposure to brain impacts. And if you remember, Dr. Oliver was saying the same thing. You think of it, if you're working for football players, there's no reason why you shouldn't recommend DHA and EPA. Maybe if anybody's working with race car drivers, they would be at risk of concussions as well. Fighters, they take kicks and punches to the head. I would even recommend this for my grandma. My grandma's sort of at an age where she can't walk very well, and if she trips and falls, she's probably going to hit her head. She probably just can't react fast enough to put her hands in front of her. So this would be a good option sort of just for everybody, whether you're an athlete or not. But let's look at what it would take to get about 3,000 milligrams per day. So I just picked a random supplement here called WHC Uno Cardio 1000. So in order to get about 3,000 to 3,200 milligrams, you need to consume 3 servings of it, which is 3 pills. Really easy to do, probably, in a day. And so I know I listed a lot of Atlantic salmon here, but I recently saw, just to sidetrack a little bit, recently saw a documentary on Netflix called Fed Up. And one of the physicians that was being interviewed for this is saying that farm-raised fish does not have any omega-3 fatty acids in it, and that it's a poorer quality fish than wild fish. So I just wanted to show you guys, I found 2 different studies. So the ones with the single asterisk corresponds to this study, and the ones with the double asterisk corresponds to this study. But both studies found that farm-raised fish has some omega-3 fatty acids. In fact, the farm-raised fish had more omega-3 fatty acids than the wild salmon. So again, I hadn't heard that one before, and so decided to look it up. So in this study down here, they found that wild salmon, you need about 5.75 ounces, almost 6 ounces to get about 3,000 milligrams. For farm-raised, a little bit less, so 4.9 to get 3,000. This one had a lot more variation, so maybe the technique they use to analyze omega-3 fatty acids is different, and that's why we have different values. So 6 to 18.5 ounces to get 3,000. Atlantic salmon down here, farm, 4.5 to 7.5 ounces. So anybody want to take a guess at how much grass-fed beef you need to consume in order to get 3,000 milligrams? Remember, this is accounting for the conversion, that poor conversion of less than 15% of ALA being converted to EPA and less than 5% of ALA being converted to DHA. So before I show the number, I did double check my math. It seemed a little bit ridiculous, but I double checked my math with my wife, who happens to be a math major, so I did get the correct number. But anybody want to guess what these numbers were? Just a random number. 36 ounces? Anybody else? 72 ounces. You need to consume 68,000 pounds of beef to get that amount. 3,000. This is per day, right? So it's a really poor argument to say that grass-fed beef has 3 times more omega-3 fatty acids. Who cares, right? It's a poor argument to make. Cholesterol is another one that I hear. Cholesterol. Grass-fed beef has lower cholesterol, therefore it's better for my health. So the recommendations were that up until this year, we're supposed to recommend that people consume no more than 300 milligrams of dietary cholesterol per day. That's about equivalent to 1.5 large eggs. For the longest time, that's what people, other dietitians promoted. Don't eat too much dietary cholesterol. Well, now, come to find out that, we know a little bit better. So, I'll just read this here if you guys in the back can't read it. It says, the 2015 Dietary Guidelines Advisory Committee will not bring forward this recommendation of cholesterol because available evidence shows no appreciable relationship between consumption of dietary cholesterol and serum cholesterol consistent with the conclusion of the AHA and AGC reports. Here, boxed in, cholesterol is not a nutrient of concern for overconsumption. So even if grass-fed beef did have less cholesterol, who cares? It's not a good argument. Well, let's look at a study that actually compared cholesterol content with grass-fed beef and grain-fed beef. So a study at Texas Tech University did just that. And what they did is they took grain-fed beef from all over the country. They did the same thing with grass-fed beef. Took grass-fed beef from all over the country, took it back to Texas Tech, slaughtered the animals, and looked at the meat content. And so what they did here, I'm guessing, so they did strip steak, which is from one part of the cow, and then compared it to ground beef, which is made from a different part of the cow. So I'm assuming if we were to, you were to ask me to compare fiber types in the muscle, so if you compare the gastrocnemius, you probably have a higher proportion of fast-twitch muscle fibers, whereas the soleus would have a higher composition of slow-twitch muscle fibers. So I'm guessing that's why they chose sort of two different areas of the cow. Maybe one area had higher cholesterol. Well, let's look at this first column here. So for strip steak, whatever that's made from, compared, they got 54.6 and 54.7. No significant difference in cholesterol content there. But what about ground beef? That had a little bit higher, but 62 compared to 62.3. Again, not much, not any difference. I wouldn't consider that a difference at all. So another argument I hear for grass-fed beef is that it has higher CLA content. So conjugated linoleic acid. So why is this important? So in the late 80s, they induced cancer in mice, and they found out that if you treat mice with CLA, they develop half as many papillomas, and they exhibited lower tumor incidences, which is a good thing. But the thing we have to understand is that grass-fed beef, it does have twice the amount of CLA, but when we cook it, there's no difference in content. So I would assume the majority of us eat cooked meat. There may be that one person who eats raw meat. You don't have to point yourself out. But the majority of us, it doesn't matter if raw grass-fed beef has twice the amount of CLA. It's just an insignificant point to make. So you would need to consume 176 pounds of raw beef a day to get the amount of CLA that the mice were getting in that study, back in the late 80s. So again, from this standpoint, not a good argument. But if I didn't know any better, I found this website actually just last night. I was sort of just finishing up my slides, and Authority Nutrition, an evidence-based approach. If I didn't know better, this sounds like a pretty good website, and I would think that they know what they're talking about. But if you read here, so after they made their case for grass-fed beef, they stated, grass-fed beef may contain slightly less total fat than grain-fed beef. It's a little bit different than what I showed, but it has a lot more omega-3 fatty acids and CLA, which are both very beneficial to health. So if you take these sort of partial truths, it may seem like a good argument, but when you dig a little deeper, it doesn't matter. That argument is just pointless. But, like I said, I don't do meat research. I'm not an expert in the field. But let's look at what the experts said. So Professor Dr. Comerford out of the Department of Dairy and Animal Science at Penn State University wrote an article back in 2010 and said, the reality is that there is no evidence whatsoever that grass-fed beef has any advantage on safety, human health, or the impact on the environment than grain-fed beef. So maybe some of you guys are thinking, well, that was in 2010, that was a long time ago. Things have surely changed since then. Wrong. Last year, here at Texas A&M, professor in our department, Dr. Smith, published an article saying, at this point, there's no scientific evidence to support the claim that background beef, or that ground beef from grass-fed cattle is healthier alternative to ground beef from conventionally raised grain-fed cattle. So again, so he published this on some article online, and he got a lot of backlash for this, like, oh, it's some conspiracy, you're getting funded by the cattle council. It was just a big mess, and he has no stake in this. It's just he reports on the truth, and that was his representation of the evidence, that there's no evidence to support that one's better than the other. Again, if your argument is that you choose grass-fed beef for some other reason, maybe ethical reason, I'm not arguing that. Maybe it's better for the environment. I'm not arguing that. I'm just saying from a health and a nutrient perspective, there's no difference, or there's no reason to think that grass-fed beef is better than grain-fed beef. But again, I hear this sort of same nutritionist that's very big with working with MMA fighters promote grass-fed products, organic products all the time. And I don't think it's necessarily the case. So I would love it if you guys would spread the word, tell everybody you run into, what we found here. And I put sort of the research articles that I chose to look so that you could always go back. I think these slides are going to be available later on. You can go back and actually look at the research and how it came to this conclusion. And then, we just sort of had like 30 more slides of supplements, but didn't have time to go through them all. I just wanted to thank you for sticking around and listening to my talk, and I'll take any questions if you guys have any.